Aloha and welcome to PTC 24 in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am now joined by Jon Mauck, Senior Managing Director for DigitalBridge Investment Management. And Jon, pleasure seeing you again.
Good to see you.
It's been 12 months. We were just saying how it goes in the blink of an eye.
So quick.
How are you finding the conference so far? We're now full on in the midst of it.
Well, look, it's an unbelievable conference every year because it's a very senior attendance, and so you get very substantive meetings, very high-quality discussions. So it's one of the best events of the year. So I really enjoy it.
It's one of those places you can come and get business done for the entire year. You can almost go back home and just sit behind your desk.
Exactly.
Just pick up the phone to follow up.
Comes out of this conversation that we have here. So it's very productive.
All right, but let's talk about what's going on and off the stage here. So the main topic this year, beyond AI and sustainability, really seems to be the geopolitical situation the world is in.
Yeah.
We have a year where more than half the world is going to go to the polls and elect new leaders. Some of the largest economies are electing new leaders, so the US, the European Commission. We have elections in Asia as well. But we also have two wars, one in Europe, one in the Middle East. We have, of course, something brewing in Asia. There's a few other pockets around the world. So people have been very vocal about it and very open, which is probably the first time I've seen such an open discussion on the topic. But what's your views of what's happening in the world and how does that translate into digital infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I think there's a very large thematic in terms of there's more instability at this point than we've seen in many years between elections, between conflicts, and also between, I believe, a polarization of trade in terms of how that's evolving. And so there's a lot of challenges which are very specific around that. That being said, on the digital economy, one of the themes we see is that it's becoming globalized, right? And so while there's a pullback on global trade, there is actually an investment in the global digitalization of the economy, which I think is a very interesting, subtle theme there. The other thing I would say that's interesting is sometimes these things are overblown by the media and the press, because the reality is there is a desire, we believe, to have trade. There's a desire to continue to have economic growth and to invest in the kinds of things we're focused on, which is the proliferation of cloud, the adoption of technologies, and so it's a very nuanced time. I think we have a cautious outlook because of that. I think we see signs of economic stimulus through rates, for example, going down in the U.S., which is probably the leading market in terms of that, then rolling into Europe and Asia Pacific broadly. But it's a challenging time. I think it's important to be measured in where we deploy capital and how we do it. But fundamentally, the underlying sector metrics driving the digital economy are candidly as strong as ever.
Okay. I was going to ask you, not even just about DigitalBridge at this stage, we'll talk about DigitalBridge in a second, but access to capital, because last year we were talking about interest rates, inflation, access to markets, and things have evolved a little bit in a positive trend, I would say. We are walking towards a positive side of things. But how does all you just said, so the geopolitical side, impact access to capital in this market? And I guess this is where geographies are going to be really, really important more than ever, because what's happening in Europe is one situation, Latin America is a different case, Asia is a different case. So maybe if you can do an around the world access to capital state of the moment.
State of the economy.
But not because DigitalBridge has a footprint everywhere. So you're still deploying a lot of capital. You're doing billions of dollars a year across the wide spectrum of digital infrastructure. But how do you see the markets going? And you can bring in things like debt and everything, different ways of financing everything.
Well, I think for many years, debt was so freely available and such a low cost per dollar that you saw that really stimulating growth and investment. We joked that debt was almost free, right? Which let people do a lot of investments otherwise they would have done. A real pullback last year, as you just suggested. I think the outlook is we'll see improvements this year in terms of access to debt, the cost of debt. So as that frees up, it's going to free up investment. That's probably, I believe, really the second half of this year. You can't ignore the U.S. election, which I think will be an important aspect of timing. So I think there's going to be a push politically to have that in place by the middle of the summer, early fall. When you think about that, though, there's also a lot of equity sitting on the sidelines, right, very broadly. Capital is being taken out of areas like traditional real estate, looking for a new place to deploy capital. And so there's a lot of equity available. And I think as debt markets stabilize and see less, or they see a risk of mitigated of rates going up, and they believe there's at least a downward look as to where rates are going to go, it's going to let people be more aggressive about deploying capital. The U.S., I think, is a leader in that. As you just suggested, by geography, Latin America, Europe, Asia Pacific, each one has its own challenges. And I think the question is going to be, where are they in that sort of conversion into more of a growth outlook, investment outlook, from what I would say an inflation mitigation strategy, right? Everyone took the approach of, let's say, let's not let the world get too ahead of itself on inflation.
Yeah.
So people have taken really tough measures, austerity measures this past year, globally, I believe. But I think you're going to see that turn, sequentially, starting with North America, then rolling into Europe and Asia.
Okay, so you have a very positive outlook on things.
Cautiously optimistic is the word.
I was going to, actually, I'll put two questions into one about DigitalBridge and one more generally.
Yeah.
We are still going through it, so what does a contingency plan look like? What does a company within this space have to do to prepare for whatever scenario that we might have? And how has DigitalBridge adopted itself around that? So it doesn't necessarily need to be your contingency plan, but what can people do, and what are a few of the measures that maybe DigitalBridge is looking at or thinking of?
Well, look, I think there's got to be a conservatism in underwriting today, and that's what we fundamentally do at DigitalBridge. We deploy capital, we think about forecasting and understanding that business plan, and so there's a level of conservatism, but every aspect of that. I think when it comes to debt, we're very focused on making sure we have fixed rate debt, and we have maturities that spread over time, so there's no concentration of risk, which has been really important. And one of the things we did 18 months ago, 24 months ago, is we started converting into fixed rate instruments, so we didn't have that market exposure, which really gave us a lot of extra flexibility through this cycle. And it's one thing to talk about capital generically as a concept versus specific companies. At the companies, we have a really important focus on managing debt maturities, managing leverage levels. We don't want to over leverage any company we have, and thinking about cash management. Because where companies really get in trouble is cash management in difficult times. And so, as part of our contingency planning, which is going to be universal, it's those pillars you have to really focus on. And I think it's important to think proactively and forward-looking versus being reactive. If you're reacting to a bad market,
you're already late.
It's too late.
Yeah,
exactly. So
it's always about the forward-looking planning. It sounds like it's don't throw all your eggs into one basket. it's in a very simplistic way.
We push every company to best practices around capital structure. Right? And we try to really think about that across the board. And for every company, we want them to think about how to seek out the best structure. It even goes down to customer contracts, right? The underlying agreement with the end customers, we think about the maturity of those. We think about escalators. We think about what currency they're going to be in. For example, if it's in South America, our businesses down there have a substantial exposure to US dollar contracts, which changes the FX risk that we're sort of underwriting and the cost of capital associated with it.
Okay, so let me now bring it closer to home and make it easier for you, so you can all woof, it's done. A lot of businesses within the DigitalBridge portfolio. You said you allow all of them, or you try to get all of them before to different levels, but always in a positive way. And I'm not going to ask you how big AI is going to be. I think that's kind of an umbrella discussion. How are your businesses preparing, the brands preparing for the AI? And I guess one of the questions, and we've seen Google do this, we've seen Meta do this, people have taken a step back. This is going to be so big that people are having to take a step back to kind of rethink, and it's not just design, it's design strategy, and then of course navigate all the jurisdictions. So how is the different ramifications of the portfolio preparing for what's coming, and what can we expect?
Yeah. Look, we are fundamentally investing capital in DigitalBridge against the thematic of the digitization of the economy, right? And what does it take to get there? The plumbing for the internet and for the cloud and technology we adopted. And so artificial intelligence is right in that sweet spot. And so we're seeing significant growth in the data center side as there's new thematics, right? Significant investment from existing customers and new areas and new types of infrastructure they need to support machine learning, the creation of AI models. And so that's been incredibly important. I think we have in that area a lot of long-term forecasted investments. We're not just looking at 12 or 18 or 24 months, but 36 or 60 months. Think about what the roadmap is.
Longer term, yeah.
On the fiber, by the way, there's tremendous connectivity between this because we don't think about a data center as just a building. It's part of an ecosystem. How do all those pieces fit together, right? Again, it's the systemic strategy. It is more about holistically, how do you think about deploying fiber? What's the fiber requirement in and out of a location? And so there's a big growth, I think, opportunity there. And then as that connects to things like small cells and towers, as those applications connect to your mobile devices and the various phones that we all have, or to 5G or private 5G on the enterprise side. All of those things need to be connected and understand what data is going to be transmitted and the requirements. And so all of those things fit together. So we spend a lot of time thinking about all of our businesses in the DigitalBridge community, I like to call it, and how they see these growth drivers and how we can collaborate to really make sure we're not thinking about AI as saying, oh, there's demand in this market for this much square footage or this much power. But what's the strategy holistically to make it and to support our customers, our end customers that need to address really challenging problems, right? To think about doubling the demand you have for data center capacity in a year has a lot of implications. Sourcing power and thinking about that.
Which is a big
strategy,
issue.
right? Very big issues for both them, green energy and energy at that scale. How you think about the data gravity to move that much information around, and how you actually connect that data to end users. And so all of those pieces have to fit together.
Okay, I've got a couple follow-up questions. First of all, I think these are going to be very quickly, and it's on the back of your panel this morning, but just so our listeners can see it, viewers can see it. Satellites, is there going to be an interest for DigitalBridge? Bring that into the community.
At this point, I don't know that satellites per se are an area we're investing in, but satellites are part of the growing digital economy, digital infrastructure. And so it's an area we're looking at very closely, but not an area that I anticipate we're going to invest in the near term.
Okay, fair enough. What about energy? Like, are you going to start having a stronger role in investing in wind farms, solar farms?
So right now, at our portfolio companies, there's a lot of collaboration and partnership around renewable energy. And so you see, for example, the Switch business, there's a lot of investment on solar and wind farms as part of that, right? Our business is focused on being carbon neutral. What I would tell you is I think there's going to be continued collaboration and partnership around that, but it's a different cost of capital and probably a different capital pool. And so how we think about that over time is a really interesting question. So I don't know that it's the same pool of capital, but it's really an interesting conversation about how we collaborate around energy procurement, sourcing, and actually energy transition to renewable.
Okay. What's going to be the big headline from DigitalBridge this year? And those usually involve a lot of billions of dollars.
Well, look, I would say right now there's fundamentally so much opportunity to develop capacity to support our customers. That is a number one thematic that we're focused on, which is how do we continue to grow to meet the demand. There is fundamentally more demand today than available capacity, for example, in data centers. We continue to expand our footprint globally, and so we're looking at new markets. And so, look, I think this might be a year where we continue to do the basic fundamental blocking and tackling that's been so valuable to our business.
Okay.
So,
is there any market that you're not in that you're going to go that you can tell us about? Or?
we're on every continent except Antarctica.
Right.
And it's
Are you going to build a data center for the penguins? Fair enough. I mean, I guess a very open question is like, what's the question I have not asked you that I should have asked you?
Oh my goodness. Well, look, I think AI is a massive opportunity. I guess what I would say is, people ask me, is the hype curve exceed reality, right? Is there more anticipation demand than there is demand available? Is there a potential air pocket in that?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I look at these things thinking about underwriting investments with a sense of skepticism by design. That's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Giving some voice of reasoning to the conversation.
But the fundamentals around that have never been stronger. And so we're really focused on success-based capital deployments, not speculative development. We're trying to make sure we think about following the logos, right? Our end market customer logos that we've always done, being prudent about where we deploy capital and how we deploy it. And so that's the mitigation. But look, we always watch that to make sure we're being thoughtful about, what's the curveball that could happen around that? But AI is such a big thematic; it's so pervasive, right? And the technology seems to be there. There's tremendous validation around it, but there's a lot of excitement around that. So excitement, makes us cautious appropriately.
Yeah. Have you identified any curveballs before what we just talked about around maybe lack of power, geopolitics, and all that? Is that something else that we're not looking at, not paying attention?
No, I think you've addressed it between energy, right? The access to capital, the global geopolitical dynamics, right? And the thinking about artificial intelligence adoption, how it gets adopted. I think we've covered a lot of topics. So I can't
it's
say.
good to know there's nothing darker lying underneath anyway.
Well, the other thing we talk a lot about is technology, right? And one of the things, there was some recent announcements with our technology investment. We also spend time looking at emerging technologies with our venture growth group, which is an area that's thinking about technologies that may benefit us and technologies that can undermine our businesses. And so we look at that proactively both on the offense and the defense. And so today we continue to be agnostic as technology. So we're not concerned with who wins the AI arms race, right? But we track all that very carefully. So again, I think that's a big thematic for us, but not a place where we see a curveball, because we're intentionally focusing on, selling picks and shovels for people to keep rolling. So,
okay, there's so many more questions I want to ask you around consolidation and new markets to entry and all those sort of things, but I realize you've got better things to do than talking to me. One last question, so bring it around the house. We are at PTC 24. We'll be back here in 12 months, hopefully. Well, we will be. What's one thing that you think it is achievable, but the industry really needs to get their act together over the next 12 months to achieve it? Something that's very important for the future development of this sector that we need to do in the next 12 months.
Well, look, that's a very open-ended question, but I would say from my standpoint, there's been a lot of discussion around carbon neutrality and renewable energy, and I think that's become, from a talking point, to table stakes, right? It's got to be part of what we're rolling out. We've been so reactive to needing energy and finding places to put it. I think there's got to be a more proactive approach to really planning for renewable energy as part of the strategy.
Okay.
So I think that's going to be important.
Okay. Be an interesting year for sure. Not just on the back of that, but everything else that we discussed. But Jon Mauck, Senior Managing Director for DigitalBridge Investment Management, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
As for your home, thank you for watching, and do check our website and social medias for more timely news from the digital infrastructure sector worldwide. At Tech Capital, you lead, we report. Mahalo.